The British said to the people that the conditions on the slave ships were good, and that the slaves were fed well and treated well. Although the slaves were crammed into as small a space as possible, they would have to survive living in their own waste, and they had to try and breathe with the stench of over 400 people. If they stepped out of line in any way, they were whipped and punished to the fullest extent of life. The British said that most of the slaves were already prisoners of war, so they were going to be slaves or put to death anyways. They also said that they were not captured cruelly. Slaves who were captured were forced to walk hundreds of miles with shackles around their wrists while being tied to the other slaves to make sure none could escape. When slaves arrived in America, they were forced off of the ship and onto a stage. They were covered in oil to make their bodies shine, and they were sold just like normal household items. If they had diarrhea, they would have something put into their bodies to block the waste from coming out. Slaves who were sold would be taken to the buyer's household and forced to work for them. They would be put onto plantations or forced to work as butlers for their owner. The British didn't really care about how their slaves felt as long as the slaves were doing the work. The owners were usually rich people who could afford to buy slaves and could afford to get workers to make sure that the slaves don't step out of line. The British said they were not very cruel to the slaves. They said that they could leave whenever they wanted to, but they would have to buy their freedom. The slaves would rarely be able to buy their freedom because they were not paid for their labour, so they would never be able to save up the money. This is an old African who was able to buy his freedom by finding and saving every penny he could. This was a slave ship captain. He was in charge of how many slaves he would take to America. He said to the British that the slaves were not treated badly on the ships, yet they were crammed into as small a space as possible, and they would survive living in their own waste. For the trip, many died of suffocation, and many were thrown overboard because they were only allowed to take around 450 slaves on board to America, and if they had too many, they would be charged. 6 or 7 slaves would be tied to a bag of cannonballs, and they would be pulled down to the bottom of the ocean. This is the map that shows where the British would take the slaves to be sold. They said that they went from England to Africa to America and then back to England. Slaves were taken all over America. They would be taken from Africa and sent all over North and Southern America. The slaves were so-called not treated badly. Yet this picture basically says what actually happens if they stepped out of line. They would be whipped almost to death. They could do nothing about it, and usually other slaves would have to watch. This would be a warning to other slaves to make sure that they didn't step out of line. This picture shows how Africans would be paid to force their own kind and many to work, and many accepted the money, even if it was their own family. They would force them to work. The person standing on the right would be holding a whip and would be whipping them to make sure they worked fast. The people on the left would be workers who were tied together carrying branches and leaves. This is what the slave ships looked like. They were large enough to carry about 500 people. They were not clean because no one would want to go down there after the long journey, nor the Africans having to urinate into that small cramped space.